Welcome to my latest video. This one is on a Lotus Esprit Turbo. This happens to be a 1988 with fuel injection drivability issues. And I started out doing sort of a helter-skelter, not particularly focused method of trying to figure out what was going on. I replaced oxygen sensor, that didn't do it. My plugs were getting fouled so quickly it was astonishing. So then it's like, well, let's go back to the basics and start from there. And for anybody else who's floundering in the abyss, this is to maybe help them along and save them a few steps that I had to go through. I would start by checking your timing marks on your cam drive pulleys up there. And number two, I would check the timing of the actual engine, and to do that you just hook your timing light up to the number one spark plug wire, and then back behind the engine there is a little plastic plug, which is hard to see. It's this big square thing that pops up, and then you can actually see the flywheel and the very faint timing marks, but they're there. But when you're finished, put your plug back in. Now, presuming all that is normal, if you look on the top of your trunk lid, hopefully you will have this wonderful drawing of the vacuum hose routing with their color codes and everything. I highly recommend you go through that because I found quite a few issues. Vacuum hoses not where they were supposed to be, torn vacuum hoses, all sorts of stuff. A couple little pointers is, you probably can't see that thing for diddly, but there are two takeoffs from underneath the intake runners. One is a blue and one is a white on this diagram. And those you will find under here by feeling around. One is like about here and one is about here underneath. I would definitely pull those off and check them, because the hose that was going here had a tear in it right where it was hooked to the nipple, so it was definitely leaking. But check all your other vacuum hoses, and they do have colors on them. If you can maybe see, this one is a white one, this one's a blue one, and then there's a red one over here. So it is color coded, so check all your vacuum hoses. Now, the other tricky thing is there is a hose from the air pump, and there are these solenoids, the exhaust solenoid and the ignition solenoid. And if you come over on the starboard side here, there is usually, as you'll find on your car, a panel sitting here with carpet. You just have to unscrew the screws and pry that out. And then on the side of your flying buttress panel here, there are two screw holes. So you unscrew those screws, reach back around behind this panel, and you will pull out this thing, which is the mounting plate for two of those solenoids. This is the ignition solenoid, and this is the exhaust bypass solenoid. So again, it's got vacuum hoses coming in and out. It's quite a spaghetti, but check. I would advise pulling this out, check and make sure all your vacuum lines are where they're supposed to be. So that's the second thing. Okay, once you've checked all your vacuum hoses and got everything leak-free and hooked to the correct connection, then you'll need the workshop manual. My car happened to come with a nice DVD-ROM with the workshop manual on it, and there is a section on the fuel injection system which is very comprehensive and well worth a look if you're still having problems. I think like the absolute first page is a list of all the components, and you can see it is extensive. And I'm going to try and blast through some of these so you don't have to scratch your head and figure out where they are, as I did. The first one is the mixture control unit, which is made up of the airflow sensor and the fuel distributor complex. All that is underneath your air cleaner. You can see the pipes from the fuel distribution part coming out, and right under the air cleaner is the airflow sensor. So that's all there. Number 4 is the electronic control unit, the ECU, that sits right behind your driver's seat. Number 5 is the warm-up regulator, which is this whole big structure here. Number 6 is the high temperature switch, which turns on the ignition solenoid, which we saw earlier, and that is these two wires going into the little plug down there. High temperature switch. Number 7 is the auxiliary air valve, which is this thing here. Number 8 is the frequency valve, which I don't know if I'm going to be able to show you. It is down in a hole. Down here is your frequency valve. It's got a 2-wire plug coming to it, so it's like right below where all the fuel lines are coming out of the mixture control unit. Sits down there under your air cleaner. Fuel pumps, fuel filter, fuel accumulator are all under the car, basically straight down from the air cleaner all the way underneath, so you have to get to them from underneath. Then you get to the fuel bypass valve, which allows air to bypass the airflow sensor, and that is also hard to see, but it is the hose here is part of that. It goes down, the valve is below it, and then the piping runs around to come off below the airflow sensor down in this area. There's 2 pipes that come off there. The boost gauge transducer, I'm not sure about. The overboost switch, I believe, is this thing that sits on the plate with the other solenoids. Number 18 is the ignition solenoid. That's this one right here. Number 19 is the EBPV solenoid, or exhaust bypass valve solenoid, which is this one right here. 20 is a delay valve. I have no idea where that is. 22 is the throttle position switch, which is right here, sort of lurking in the shadows, but it's the black thing right there. Then comes the low temperature switch, which I'm not exactly sure where that is. Then number 24 is the thermal time switch, which is that thing right there. 25 is the exhaust back pressure valve, which is down below on the exhaust pipe. as is the actuator. 27 is the lambda sensor, which is basically your oxygen sensor right there. 28 is fuel injector, got 4 of those. 29 is the thermal ignition valve. That is a valve with 3 pipes coming off of it for changing how the vacuum lines are hooked up, and that is basically underneath this. It's sticking out the side of the inlet over here, so you have to reach under, and it's like right there. Number 30 is the throttle jacking capsule. Swing around here. That is this thing here, which has a long arm that hooks to a swing lever, and when you start the car, it's supposed to have suction at this that pulls the arm that pulls back on this lever, which ups your, it's like pushing on the throttle, but it does it for you. And number 31 is the cold start injector, which is this blue thing right there. So that's most of the components. Then you have the ignition box, which is right behind the engine there in the trunk area when you pull the panel off. The manual does come with a beautiful drawing of it with labeling of all the different parts. The engine overspeed module, the low coolant module, the overboost relay, the coil, fuel bypass speed sensing relay, fuel bypass control relay, idle changeover relay, fuel pumps relay, fuel pump fuses, the inertia switch with the little thing that pops up and down if you flip the car over. This thing hanging out open is the RPM relay. There's the ACU idle up relay, the ACU idle up control relay, the fast warm-up relay. There's this little plug for checking the duty cycle of your frequency valve, and there's a little black box called the ignition amplifier. So lots of parts. The manual does have some nice drawings of how everything works together and how everything is interconnected. This is the fuel system schematic diagram. But more importantly, they have a couple pages on the vacuum circuits, and each page is for a different mode of the engine. This one happens to be engine cranking when the inlet manifold is below 35 degrees C. There's one for once it starts and the water's cold. There's one for when it starts and the water's warm. There's several pages, but they all show the path the vacuum is taking for that condition. And these things are invaluable trying to figure out what's going on with your car. And to go along with that, so that's the vacuum part of what happens under different engine conditions. Farther back in the chapter, it's called the LF section, are a bunch of schematics for the electrical system, again for different engine temperature and running states. This happens to be the cold run and idle below 25 degrees C oil temperature one. But it shows exactly where the power is going to all the different relays and stuff. Now in my case, after spending hours getting all the vacuum hoses hooked up properly, then using this diagram I could see where I was supposed to have vacuum and where I wasn't. So using those and my ancient, incredibly cheap-ass vacuum gauge, which I just put a T-fitting on the end of, and there's some connectors on all of these vacuum lines, so you can easily unhook them, put your T in, hook up your vacuum gauge, crank up the engine, and then see where you are. So in my case, I could go to the vacuum sources and put my vacuum gauge on and show that they were pulling a vacuum. For what it's worth, the vacuum from the engine vacuum pump comes up over here amongst all these wires. It's a hard plastic black pipe. It's down there, but it's a hard plastic black pipe about 1/4 inch in diameter. So I could tell I was getting vacuum at the vacuum sources, but when I cranked my engine, I was not getting vacuum in the lines that showed where it was supposed to be having vacuum. So I went to my ignition solenoid, which is the middle one there on that little plate, and it was not transferring vacuum. Put electrical probe on the wires and found that it was not getting the signal. If I put 12 volts to the plug, you could hear it click back and forth and it would switch. So using the electronic schematic, I basically started tracing the wires that go to the ignition solenoid back. This is probably too tiny to see, but in my case, this is the ignition solenoid, and it was supposed to be getting power coming down this line, and that comes from the fast warm-up relay. I checked out the fast warm-up relay, and it was getting power, and if you put 12 volts on it, you could hear it click, click, clicking, so that was okay. So then the question is, where was the power supposed to be coming from? And it had one wire basically going to ground and going through the fuel enrichment module, and that seemed to be checking out okay. But as far as I could tell, the actual power was supposed to be coming in on a yellow wire that went through the high temperature switch. Well, the high temperature switch I checked out, and that seems to be working. And the yellow wire goes all over Hell's Half Acre, but it basically comes back to the RPM relay. Now the yellow wire also goes to the electronic control unit, the ECU, and I was afraid my ECU had died, which is like a $2,000 replacement. But further investigation showed for the RPM relay, you have 5 wires, actually 6 wires, that go into it, and one is a purple wire which has power, and here's my RPM relay naked to the world. Big purple wire is power going in, and there are other wires coming in from various things, from the fuel bypass speed sensing relay. All those seem to be functioning, and then you have the 2 yellow wires that come out of it that are supposed to have the power switching from the purple wire coming in to the yellow wire going out, and it wasn't happening. Now when I opened up my RPM relay, the actual relay part was loose. You could actually rattle it around because some of the solder joints in the back had come undone. I soldered those up, but did not fix the problem. So I have a new RPM relay coming in the mail, and hopefully when I get that, I will plug it in, and then my solenoids will solenoid, my vacuum will go where it's supposed to. Then I'll be able to adjust my frequency valve and get everything else straight. But that's the essence of the fuel injection system. You gotta have, once you get your vacuum lines straightened out and make sure you don't have any holes or leaks or anything, then you need the workshop manual with the schematics for the electronics and the schematics for where the vacuum's supposed to be at different engine running modes to really figure this out rather than just go at it shotgun like I started out doing.